What's up guys, here's the promised video of ranking the tanks in multiple categories. Keep in mind this will primarily be for Mythic Plus with M Plus builds in challenging content. Tuning and proper gear will also change this when Mythic Plus actually comes out in Dragonflight. For the categories, we'll do the following. Damage, covering a mix of their single target, AoE, and overall, with a bit more weight towards single target. Tankiness, for how well they survive with their mitigation, defensive cooldowns, and a proper group setup with considerations of magic, bleed, and physical damage. Self-sustainability, for how reliant they are on the healer's attention and for the group's ability to stop damage. Fun, my subjective experience on how enjoyable the class has been. Difficulty, my take on how hard each spec with regard to picking up and mastering, including how punishing or forgiving a spec may be. And finally, a total ranking for what I predict will be the best tank. I will rank these on a scale of 1 to 5. Starting off with damage. Bear tanks. This class is insanely buffed, so much so that they gave it a 50% aura buff to almost all abilities except for Moonfire, and Rage of the Sleeper now gives a big damage boost. After all these buffs, it's definitely one of the highest damage tanks in both single target and AoE. Be warned though, Bear is very Maul reliant now. This was Bear's biggest weak point before, but after the buffs, 4.7 out of 5, plus 0.5 for Mark of the Wild. Blood decays. Damage is very strong, more so after the big buffs to almost everything recently. Single target is strong, and especially when spec'd into Bloodshot, while maintaining good blood shield uptime. However, not having a group buff definitely hurts. It is also hard to spec into a lot of damage options without sacrificing survivability. 3.9 out of 5. Prot Warriors. Very high damage with potential to be one of the highest. The recent nerfs didn't do a whole lot to Warriors. Warriors can play very greedily with their talents, utilizing battle stance and how they spend their globals, speccing into Bloodborne, Tough as Nails, and Dragon Roar CDR. Battle stance removes the 10% damage reduction from defensive stance and gives 3% more crit. Rage and globals can be spent heavier on executes and revenge for damage. Solid damage across the board with a lot of potential. However, with a conservative build and playstyle in mind, 3.8 out of 5, plus 0.5 for Battle Shell. Vengeance Demon Hunter is good damage across the board. The recent Frailty change has nerfed their potential damage, but overall a buff for most players in M+. Soul Cleave does good single target when combined with Frailty, AoE is just as good as before with Spirit Bomb, and cooldowns are powerful when stacked with Frailty. Good single target, good AoE, and not much sacrificing for damage. Very good overall. 4.1 out of 5, plus 0.5 for Chaos Brand. Prot Paladins can be built more offensively. Most of Paladin's damage comes from wings being so powerful and Divine Soul and AoE similar to Shadowlands. It's got one of the highest, if not the highest single target, one of the highest AoE, and one of the best overall damage. Problem is, Paladins will have to build more defensively, resulting in way less damage. With a full defensive build in mind, 4 out of 5. Brewmaster is currently the king of damage with how broken Resonant Fist is at the moment. Their single target is very high with every CD up, and their AoE damage is insanely high because of Resonant Fist, Charred Passions, and the Exploding Keg Boneless Brew combo. Overall damage, it's definitely the highest, 5 out of 5, and plus 0.5 for Mystic Touch. Tankiness. Bear tanks are very tanky after major buffs. Moonfires now reduce the damage you take by 10%, and after the Wildfire heals for an insane amount. Rage of the Sleeper and Barkskin are both on a short CD while providing tons of defensive value. Leech from Rage of the Sleeper and Gear is also more impactful now that bears actually do damage. The tier set now gives a ton of extra passive healing, making it the strongest tier set for tanks. The rework tree brings back Blood Frenzy and 2 second longer Iron Fur. With the extra Rage, Incarn can be under 2 minute CD. Strong across the board against all types of damage, 4.1 out of 5. Blood Decays are one of the best and worst tanks at surviving, basically unkillable with how much resource they generate now. Blood shields, large AMS, and the amount of defensive CDs they have make them a lot less susceptible to spiking like crazy. Also really good at all types of damage, but particularly good at magic and bleed over other tanks. However, they are still the type of tank that will reach a threshold where they will eventually get one shot when misplayed. 4.2 out of 5. Prot Warriors, the kings of surviving, so much so that they are now one of the best at dealing with magic and bleed, which was unheard of for warriors before. With the added leech, permanent ignore pain, spell block, 100% uptime on shield block, and extremely short CD on shield wall, demo shouts, Prot Warriors are basically immune to damage. Warriors also have an insane cheat def from their talent Battle Serve Veteran. The only minor weakness with Warrior is if there's too much magic damage. Bosses like Last Boss of Ruby Life Pool or Jade Serpent Third Boss will run Warrior CDs dry, 4.8 out of 5. Vengeance Demon Hunters are solid across the board. Demon Spike's uptime is much higher and their HP no longer spikes as hard as they used to with all the added passive damage reduction talents. Still great at all types of damage including bleed and magic. A tiny bit weak against very high frequent damage. 4 out of 5. After playing Prop Paladin with Sentinel Fix, this talent is insane. Paladins have the most defensives by far, giving them answers to almost every type of damage out there. However, the 40% change did heavily affect their Word of Glory healing. Paladins definitely feel like the tank that can mitigate a ton but struggle to sustain without some healing. In the right hands with a good healer, this is probably the most unkillable tank right next to Warrior. 4.3 out of 5. Brewmasters are the squishiest tank. They do have a lot more defensives now compared to before, and have answers to occasional high damage. However, unlike other tanks, Brew struggles heavily with constant magic and bleed damage. Without CDs, Brewmasters fall over quickly. The 40% change also heavily affects Brew. Expel Harm and Celestial Brew are noticeably smaller. Healers require a lot more healing into Brewmaster. This could be hard to tell since Brew has always done better with more gear and stagger getting stronger, but for now, 1.4 out of 5. Self-sustainability. With the recent changes, Bear Sustain is much more powerful. After Wildfire does insane amount of healing to both yourself and your teammates. Rage of the Sleepers on a 1 minute CD with added Leech makes Bear insanely tanky while it's up. The buffed tier set also provides Bear a lot of extra passive healing. Bear is also quite good at stopping mechanics with Roar and Typhoon. 4.1 out of 5. Blood DK. This class is literally designed to self-sustain. DK benefit the most from the 40% change since most of their healing is unaffected. Also great at dealing with mechanics going off and can stop a lot of mechanics with 2 charges of Grip, Blinding Sleet, and Asphyxiate. 5 out of 5. Prot Warriors. Historically, this class struggled with recovering from damage taken. Warriors are basically immune to damage now, as I've said, and when it does take damage, it is easily healed back with the added Leech, Indomitable, or Impending Victory. Stormbolt, Shockwave, Fear, and Spell Reflect are all great at dealing with mechanics. 4 out of 5. Vengeance. This class has always had decent self-sustain through soul healing, but now with Leech and Frailty healing as well. 10-second Silence Sigil, Chaos Nova, and Sigil of Misery are also really good at stopping casters. I'm actually a huge fan of Vengeance right now as a pug tank. It can carry keys harder than most other tanks if you pug most of your keys. I do feel healer externals are a bit more important on DH than other tanks. 4.2 out of 5. Prot Paladins have always struggled to use Word of Glory because of heavy holy power cost and GCD. During wings, Paladin self-sustain is actually very good, but outside it is way weaker. The 40% change is very noticeable on Paladin. Definitely healer reliant on harder pulls without CDs and could use some externals, but overall not bad. In my opinion, this class is one of the best at carrying pugs, with the insane interrupts from Avenger Shield and Short Hammer of Justice. 3.7 out of 5. Brewmasters have always struggled with healing, and it does need a little bit of healing to get going. The higher stagger you can get, the more self-healing you do. Brewmaster doesn't have much self-healing aside from Orbs, Expel Harm, and Big Purify Guy Plin. Overall, the 40% change hurt bad, and Brewmaster is definitely having trouble staying alive. 1.5 out of 5. Fun. Bear is probably the least enjoyable tank, but it is slightly more interesting than the Shadowlands version. The loss of doing insane pulls with Incarn definitely hurts the fun factor. I'll always enjoy playing Bear from time to time just for a more chill experience. 2.2 out of 5. Blood Decay is back to the old DK, but with infinite resources. The fun in Blood Decay has always been living on the edge and trying to stay alive on your own. Death striking to keep up Icy Talons and sitting in D&D all the time kinda sucks. Resource management is also not as interesting, but the thrill of surviving dangerous pulls is still there. Tombstone is now more of an offensive CD, and it's great having an extra offensive CD, especially for aggro. Having no downtime definitely feels great as well. 3.8 out of 5. Prot Warrior is super fun on a more casual level because of how ridiculous it can feel with all the button mashing. Going into a pull with CDs every time and having a lot of damage cooldowns to burst with feels great. However, it does get a little old when resource management or mitigation isn't as big of a deal. 3.5 out of 5. Vengeance has always been a fun tank, just frustrating before doing low damage and feeling squishy outside of meta. With the added flavor of Frailty and a couple of extra buttons, VDH has definitely been more fun than before. 3.9 out of 5. Prot Paladin is one of my favorite tanks on beta at the moment with how insane Wings feels. Opening up pulls with Wings and Divine Toe is still one of the most satisfying feelings as a tank. But defensives are also a lot of fun to play with. What I've been enjoying doing is playing cooldown Tetris with my wide array of defensive cooldowns. Avenger Shield not generating holy power anymore has received a lot of negativity, but it hasn't really bothered me. In fact, I prefer the super high holy power generation during wings and less outside of it. The only unfun part about Paladin right now are the globals attached to Word of Glory and Consecrate. Consecrate in general sucks real bad and never really been a fan of it. 4.3 out of 5. Brewmaster has been my favorite tank to play as of recently, but I'm sure this changes up every so often. I'm currently loving the busy rotation and how bursty it gets with Exploding Keg. If Brew didn't feel so squishy, I'd probably say this is one of the most fun tanks I've tested. I've been busy trying to figure out how to survive these new dungeons with all the tools Brew has now. Also, the only fun part about Brewmaster is Celestial Brew and Expel Harm being on a GCD. 4.4 out of 5. Difficulty. Bear has always been the easiest tank. Rotation has almost no interactive mechanic and there is no mitigation to manage. They are a tiny bit more difficult compared to before, just because Incar no longer makes you completely immune to damage. You will also need to be spreading your moonfires and spending gore procs instead of only thrashing. Very easy to get into, hard to play incorrectly. 1.2 out of 5. Blood Decay can be a bit daunting to get into with all the different resources, staying in D&D all the time, and tracking Icy Talons. But overall, it's pretty simple when you get into the flow of pressing your buttons. It is definitely a lot less punishing than old DK with the larger absorbs and smaller windows of randomly getting one shot. With higher resource generation, there is not as much thought process behind Death Striking. Can just hit it every few globals or so. 3.6 out of 5. Pro Warrior, even though it has a lot more buttons than before, it is the most forgiving tank right now, and it's hard to mess up your mitigation. It also doesn't particularly hurt to overcap Ignore Pain because of the high rage generation and importance of spending rage for anger management. There is also no longer a struggle to deal with magic or bleed damage. 2.1 out of 5. Vengeance is extremely quick and simple to pick up, but has a bit more finesse with resource spending. With Frailty stacks, Spirit Bomb, and Soul Cleave, you will have to think about your globals a little bit. This is also the only tank left that has mitigation management, and it can be a bit daunting to play if you don't fully utilize your soul healing. Definitely less punishing compared to Shadowlands, but a lot more interactive. 3.9 out of 5. Prop Paladin is simple to pick up, but significantly harder to play well compared to before. When misplayed, it can feel very squishy or undertuned. Your reliance on staying in your Consecrate, keeping Shield Righteous up, managing Blessing of Dusk and Dawn, and more importantly, playing your rotation well with Avenger Shield no longer generating holy power. Paladin globals are also a lot tighter with an extra charge of Judgment and Blessed Hammer. Paladins also have a ton of utility to make good use of, notably locking down multiple targets with Main Shield Divine Resonance, Focus Avenger Shields, Short Fist of Justice, Blinding Light, and their multiple blessings. With 5 different defensive cooldowns and a 45-second Guardian cheat proc, Paladins have to play their defensives pretty well to survive. This is definitely a high effort, high reward tank that can be hard carry for pug groups. 4.2 out of 5. Brewmaster is the hardest tank to pick up right now, with the biggest rotational button density and multiple different cooldowns. Keeping up Rushing Jadewind, Charred Passions, and fitting in rotational buttons require a lot more effort than other tanks. Brew also requires the most encounter knowledge to know when to use defensive CDs, particularly the Fuse Magic since it's a powerful magic-only damage reduction, and the debuff deflection. Purified timings are also more important than before. This could just be a tuning thing, but Brewmaster feels like the complete opposite of Warrior, where you are heavily punished and can easily die when misplayed. However, I do feel like Brewmaster can still do the highest content when played well. 4.7 out of 5. Finally, for the overall ranking on what I think will be the strongest or most popular tanks. Please keep in mind, some of these will be so close it will be hard to put one above the other. After all the buffs recently, I don't think there's much of a gap between them. This will probably change, but here are my thoughts currently. Starting with the best and most popular will be Warrior simply because of how tanky they are and how good their damage is. Even after the small nerfs recently, Warrior stays extremely powerful. No tank survives the same way Warriors do right now, and it is very forgiving compared to some of these other tanks. Battle Shout is also another large factor if the meta has classes that benefit from it. Now for the surprise, Bear is back. I think Bear deserves the number 2 spot because of how much they've been buffed. Not only is their damage insanely high, but their survivability is also quite good now. If the other party members don't bring Mark of the Wild, it will be a really large party buff. I still think Warrior takes the number 1 spot because of how tanky they are and how much Warrior utility can bring to the group. However, I do feel the tanks are so close it would be very hard to put one above the other. Number 3 will be Demon Hunter with their solid damage and survivability. But more importantly, the 10-second Silent Sigil, Chaos Nova, Darkness, and Chaos Brand. Demon Hunter is just bringing one of the best kits to M+ at the moment while being very competitive in performance. I had a hard time putting this or Bear as number 2, but ultimately Bear is much easier to play and performs better at surviving and damage. Number 4 is also an insanely tough one. I'd pick Paladin because of their utility. Paladins are very tanky with unlimited defensive CDs, but are also a bit behind in damage because of how their talent tree forces them to choose between damage and survival. They also do not provide any group buffs. Despite all of this, I've been doing very high keys on Paladins with no problem, and it honestly feels better playing Paladin even in some of these keys just because of how much control it brings. If I was pugging a lot of keys, this would be my number 1 tank for pugs. Number 5. Blood Decay is really close to the rest, especially after 40% change and big buffs. This class is mostly unkillable in good hands and can do really good damage. Players who are good at Blood Decay might find this class to be one of the best, if not the best. This might sound insane, but even if I put it at number 5, it's really not that far from the top. The biggest thing the other tanks have going for them is their group buff or Paladin's utility. In terms of throughput and survivability, I'd put DK right at the top. I gave Paladins a higher rank because I value the interrupts a bit more with how kick heavy these dungeons are. As a tank, Blood Decay is definitely one of the strongest. Number 6 would be Brewmaster. The 40% change has felt the most impactful on Monk, but if played well, it can definitely tank very high keys. I've tried tanking some high keys on Brewmaster, and it's definitely not as bad. It does struggle a lot compared to other tanks though to survive. It's in such a weird position because it can actually do the highest damage of any tank right now. I can already see this class getting a big damage nerf and a large survivability bump some way or another. Definitely a very playable tank, even if it's ranked last. These are just my thoughts after testing every tank to their limit in high beta keys for 12 hours a day. I am very surprised by how close the tanks feel now after most of the recent changes, and I bet as I'm making this video, there will be more changes. With tanks, always play whatever you're most comfortable with or enjoy the most. Tanks have far more responsibility than any other role in M+, and it is so important for tanks to always be playing in their comfort zone, rather than whatever is meta. That is it for the video. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what tanks you guys are playing, and if you change your opinions after this video.